Peter Quint is one of the main antagonists of the show, The Haunting of Bly Manor. He commits some of the most heinous actions in the show and is manipulative, aggressive, and intimidating. Many characters on the show have a very negative view towards Peter Quint, and rightfully so. Hannah and Jaime actively dislike Peter and have nothing but bad things to say about him. But one character does fall in love with him, the intelligent and ambitious Rebecca Jessel. Through Rebecca's experiences with Peter, the audience sees Peter's appeal and his softer side. He is handsome, intelligent, passionate, and ambitious, qualities of a man that Rebecca has always been looking for. He makes her feel special and seen. He listens to her and compliments her intelligence and reaffirms her talents. This is what ensnares her to Peter. Unfortunately, it will lead her to nothing but pain and death. Peter, while sympathetic at times, will always prioritize himself over others, even those he cares about and loves. Peter will justify his actions as righting wrongs done against him, but ultimately these actions are selfish and only satisfy his own desires. His untimely and fateful crossing with the lady in the lake sets Peter on a path of more misery and doom. When Peter Quint first appears in the story, he is seen at Bly Manor by Dani Clayton. She sees him on top of the parapet. Dani gives him a weak wave, but Peter only leers back at her, making her uncomfortable. She later brings this up with the other staff members at Bly, but they are confused and begin to grow concerned. The Wingrave, however, give each other a knowing look. They know it was Peter who Dani saw. It isn't until Dani sees Peter Quint again through a window during a game of hide-and-seek with the Wingrave children that the alarms are fully raised. Peter will appear sporadically throughout the show. Usually glimpses of him are seen by Dani. He almost always will leer at her contemptuously. Peter seems to enjoy being seen and revels in the mayhem that he causes. For most of the show's run, most of the characters believe that Peter Quint had run off with Henry Wingrave's money, leaving his lover, the new governess, Rebecca Jessel, behind. This is believed to be the cause of Rebecca taking her own life by drowning herself in the lake. Hannah tells Dani of Peter, quote, "all the world's vices in disguise of its graces. Anyway, the less I say about him, the better. You know he skipped town, with a tidy sum of Henry's money and the poor thing's heart. Stole a lot, that one. Sticky fingers." When Dani later goes to investigate the grounds, she's startled by Jaime, who is also hunting for Peter. But instead of being armed with a fire poker, Jaime has her rifle. Jaime tells Dani, quote, "shot plenty of rats with it. More than happy to add Peter fucking Quint to the tally." Clearly, people do not have high regard for Peter after everything that happened with Rebecca. However, the truth is far more darker and sinister than anyone could have imagined. Peter never left Rebecca Jessel, and that was where the true problem lies. On the surface, Peter comes off as a confident, intelligent, and charming young man. During his introduction scene, the song "Tainted Love" plays as Peter struts into the office, a foreshadow of things to come. Peter Quint works for the very successful and very well-connected Henry Wingrave, and seems to have Henry's ear. Peter acts as Henry's assistant, seemingly helping with everything Henry needs. When Peter first meets Rebecca, he is the one to conduct her interview, because Henry couldn't be bothered to get his reading glasses. During the interview, Peter is the one to pick up on Rebecca's impeccable resume. He knows there's more to her than meets the eye. It is by Peter's suggestion that Henry agrees to hire Rebecca. Henry relies on Peter as not only his business associate, but also other personal and more delicate decisions. But Peter is also involved in less glamorous and more tedious chores that Henry needs done. It is Peter who drives Rebecca to Bly. Throughout the show, Peter is also seen being sent to Bly to pick up random things for Henry. Rebecca picks up on this strange relationship and inquires Peter about his position, to which Peter responds, quote, "Well, I had to hire you. I mean, I'm already the gopher, the chauffeur, and the nursemaid. If I didn't hire you, I'd be the nanny too." During the car ride to Bly, Peter shows Rebecca his softer side and his affection for Henry. He tells Rebecca that Henry is, quote, "a good man. He's having a bad stretch, that's all." As Rebecca is dragged off by an excited Flora, Rebecca and Peter exchange a passing look, hinting at their blossoming attraction. After Rebecca begins to settle at Bly, Peter stops by again, bringing roses as a gift. But instead of giving it to Rebecca, he chooses to give it to Flora. Rebecca is slightly disappointed, but Peter asks Flora to share some of her roses with her. I talked about this scene before in my Rebecca Jessel video, so if you're interested in that video, please check out the Bly Manor playlist. Later, Miles asks Peter why he gave the flowers to Flora instead of giving it to Rebecca. Peter slyly tells him that he didn't give it to Flora, indicating that he did this intentionally as a play on Rebecca's emotions, as a means to increase her anticipation for their next meeting, which works. This is one of Peter's more benign manipulations, but it just gives a sample of his manipulative tendencies. Later that night, a rainstorm falls over Bly, prompting Rebecca to invite Peter to tea as a way to pass the time until the storm is dissipated. Peter accepts, and the two begin to converse. This time, they have a more private and honest conversation. Peter coyly tells Rebecca that he understands the true reason Rebecca accepts the job as the children's governess, pointing out that Rebecca has impeccable credentials, but chooses a job that is not suited or ideal for her career as a roundabout means to get to her long-term goals. By becoming governess to the Wingrave children, Rebecca will have professional and personal connections to the Wingraves, something that is arguably more valuable than the right job history. Rebecca only responds with a smile, and the two share a nice cup of tea. They later move into the living room. Now sitting closer together, Peter opens up to Rebecca, sharing his more truthful and vulnerable side to her. He confesses to her that his life goal is to make something of himself. He confides in her that he too is stalled in his professional ambitions due to his poor conditions and his status of his birth. Quote, "I'm simply not part of the fucking club." Peter tentatively brushes his fingers on Rebecca's, and he confesses to her that he is here with her because he feels hopeful, something that he doesn't feel often in his life. Rebecca reciprocates, and the two share a long, meaningful look before Peter breaks it to return back to London. On a separate trip, Peter travels back to Bly. He stops by the classroom where Flora, Miles, and Rebecca are having a lesson. Miles asks Peter when Henry Wingrave will come to visit them, and to Miles' disappointment, Peter responds that he doesn't know. Seeing that Miles is dejected by his answer, Peter offers Miles his father's lighter, a lighter that Peter is often seen flicking and using. This lighter is something sentimental to Peter, so it is significant that he chooses to give it to Miles. He tells Miles, quote, "This belonged to my dad. It's a little piece of him. One of the nice bits, really." This cheers the young Miles up, and Rebecca is impressed by Peter's generosity and sincerity towards the children. Later that night, Peter knocks on Rebecca's door. She opens it to find a tongue-tied Peter who struggles to find an excuse for why he's knocking at her door late at night. Rebecca grabs Peter, and the two share a passionate night together. For a time, the Wingrave children, along with Rebecca and Peter, share what is seemingly an idyllic life. The children are happy, and Rebecca and Peter enjoy spending time with them. All seems perfectly splendid, but it doesn't last long. Peter is always sharply dressed and carries himself with a certain swagger, but behind his slick veneer lies a brooding, insecure, and bitter person. This side of Peter begins to appear almost immediately with Rebecca. After spending a night together, the couple wake up to a new day. Rebecca goes to get ready for work, but Peter grabs her and asks her to stay in bed with him. It starts off playful and cute, but Peter turns more serious and aggressive when Rebecca keeps refusing. Rebecca is able to placate him and is able to leave, but this leaves a contemplative Peter who stares off after her. Later that night, Peter brings Rebecca to the forbidden wing of the house. In the master bedroom, he surprises her with some romantic candles and wine. He also gives her a very expensive fur coat, a coat that belonged to the late Charlotte Wingrave. Peter claims that it was Henry who had given him permission for Rebecca to have it, but this is most likely a lie, as Henry Wingrave is still pining over the dead Charlotte and would never give her personal effects away. Peter lies to Rebecca to put her at ease, and she accepts the coat. This will become a trend for Peter and Rebecca. Whenever Rebecca becomes hesitant to do something she perceives as wrong, Peter will coax her into doing it anyways. The two begin to take pictures of themselves with a Polaroid camera. The happy couple gets more intimate, and they move their activities to the bed. They are abruptly interrupted by Hannah Gross, who chastises the couple for being in the forbidden part of the house. Rebecca sheepishly makes her escape, but Peter and Hannah have a confrontational exchange, with Hannah telling Peter, quote, "If I ever find you in here again, in Charlotte's things, ever again, so help me God, I will drag you out of this house by your bloody ear and throw you into that dirty lake." This is a dark foreshadow for Peter's fate, and will cause Peter's resentment towards Hannah to grow to outright hostility. Later, when Peter and Rebecca rejoins the others in the kitchen, Owen is making cake batter and invites everyone to taste it. Peter is already in a foul mood after the exchange with Hannah, so when he sees Owen feeding batter to Rebecca, he becomes insanely jealous and enraged. But Peter plays it off as nothing is wrong, even tasting the batter himself and choosing strawberry as the better option. However, when Peter and Rebecca return to their room, he confronts Rebecca and degrades her for tasting the cake batter. Rebecca is caught off guard and is stunned, but Peter persists and is beyond reason. He continues to project his insecurities onto the completely innocent action. He tells her, quote, "You wanted people to take you seriously? You said you took this job because you didn't want old men looking up your skirt or down your blouse, but age him down and dumb him up, and you're just open up when you're told? Is that it? Do you have any idea what you looked like?" This is an incredibly manipulative move, because Rebecca had confided in him about her fears of her prospects, and he uses the information to degrade her and gaslight her. Peter storms off, and Rebecca is left alone, confused and hurt. Sometime later, Peter returns to Bly to visit Rebecca again. He acts as if nothing unpleasant had happened. Rebecca is furious with him, and Peter continues to act oblivious to why she would be upset. When Rebecca refuses to drop the subject and confronts him, Peter finally apologizes for how he acted towards her, but he still plays it off like it wasn't a big deal and claims that he wasn't acting like himself. He's able to coax her into taking him back and promises her that he will never treat her like that again. As they reunite and kiss, Peter catches Hannah eavesdropping. He confronts her in the hallway, ominously turning off the vacuum cleaner, and tells her, quote, "Honestly, Hannah, give the vacuum a rest. Live a little." Sometime later, Peter and Hannah have another confrontation in the forbidden wing of the house. Hannah catches Peter stealing one of Charlotte's necklaces. He tries to tell her that he's picking it up for Henry, but Hannah isn't buying his story, and she demands the necklace back. Peter drops his innocent pretense and threatens Hannah, saying, quote, "You know, you should be nicer to me, Hannah. I mean, one word from me and you'll be thrown out with nothing but your week's wages." Hannah is unfazed and responds, quote, "This is my home, Peter Quint. You'll leave long before I do." This quote will become another foreshadows of things to come. Peter is a charismatic liar. Most of the time it works in his favor, like seen with Rebecca and Henry, but when caught and cornered, Peter will show his true colors as a venomous and malicious person, as seen when Hannah refuses to let Peter off the hook. In a quiet moment with Rebecca, Peter comes to the resolution that he's had enough of his status in life. He confides in her that he has a plan for their future. Rebecca is confused, so Peter tells her, quote, "We're not like them, Bex, okay? We're not. Henry's never gonna give you that pupillage. He's never gonna make me a partner. The only thing the English care about is class. You and I, we're always gonna be the help in their eyes." Peter explains that if they go to America, they can start anew. He believes that in America, with enough money, they could be whoever they want to be. He doesn't tell her his full plans, only he tells her that there's a bright future for them, and that she should pack her bag for a quick getaway. Peter promises her that he will come back for her, and the two are happy and hopeful at their new prospects. After leaving Rebecca, Peter returns to the forbidden master bedroom to retrieve Charlotte's necklace. He runs into the children in the hallway, and he tries to coax them back to bed, but the children are shaken and scared of something. But as Peter once again tries to get them to go back to bed, he is grabbed by Viola, the lady in the lake. She emerges from the shadows and violently strangles him to death. Peter's spirit soon manifests upon his body's death and witnesses the horrible tableau before him. Viola carries his dead body off, casually returning to the lake, not even noticing him. In frustration and despair, he cries out after her, and in an accidental moment, Peter's spirit bumps up against Miles. The contact, combined with Peter's strong emotional outbursts, causes Peter to be able to temporarily take over Miles's body. This causes the young Miles to yell after Viola. As mentioned before, this scene was foreshadowed by Hannah. who has mentioned before to Peter that if she ever found him in the forbidden wing going through Charlotte's things again, she will take him by the ear and throw him into the lake, which is exactly what happens to Peter when Viola drags his body to the bottom of the lake. Like the other spirits at Bly, Peter soon finds himself lost in time, reliving old memories and becoming disoriented. One of the memories that Peter is taken to is a fairly recent one involving his mother. This memory is painful and unpleasant for Peter, but it reveals a lot about why Peter is the way he is. The memory begins with a persistent pounding at the door. When Peter goes to open it, he finds that his mother is there. Instead of happiness, Peter only feels dread upon seeing her. She appraises his appearance and his home, but not as a proud mother would, more like a loan shark coming to appraise her victim. He's shocked to see her, asking with trepidation, quote, You're out? To which she coolly responds, I'm out. She tells him that quote-unquote they said she had been cured and that they had set her free, hinting that she was put away in an institution. It is obvious Peter is not pleased to see her, asking her directly what she wanted from him. He tries to appeal to his sympathies, saying that she has no means to sustain herself and that she could not find work, but Peter is unmoved. He bluntly asks her if he sent her, referring to his father. His mother responds, quote, You know he'd kill you if he could, for what you did to him. This causes Peter to become increasingly agitated, and he asks her, For what I did to him? After all he did? His mother continues her plea, a plea Peter is sure she rehearsed with his own father to garner sympathy. When it doesn't work, his mother decides to force Peter, insinuating that she will go to Henry Wingrave to ask for help if Peter did not help her. She insinuates that she will tell Henry Wingrave all about the sealed juvenile records that Peter had. It will reveal to Henry Peter's troubled past. It is clear that this is a shakedown from the start. Peter's mother had planned to blackmail her own son for money. Peter tries to tell her that he has no money, to which he asks him, quote, Oh, you're not a rich man, Petey? Just work for one, do you? This will explain Peter's abrupt plan to escape with Rebecca, and his subsequent return to Bly to steal Charlotte's necklace. Knowing that he cannot escape his past in England with his mother free, Peter decides for a fresh start in America with Rebecca. He begins to steal a lot of money from Henry Wingrave to fund their life, an embezzlement scheme at Henry's firm. It isn't clear, though, if he had been stealing money this whole time, or that he recently started and stole a large sum. While he's getting the funds together to run away with Rebecca, Peter will pawn off Charlotte's necklace to pay off his mother and buy them more time. Unfortunately, that is when he encounters the lady in the lake and is killed. With his corpse now rotting at the bottom of the lake, Peter comes to realize that he is trapped on the grounds of Bly and cannot leave. He finds himself doomed to wander the grounds of Bly forever, facing the inexorable erosion of time. After some time after Peter's death, Peter manifests himself and reappears before Rebecca, who is startled to see him emerging from the shadows in her room. At first, she's furious with him for abandoning her and making her an accomplice to his schemes, but he soon shows her the truth of his death. Rebecca is sorrowful and pines after him. Each passing day, Rebecca grows more and more distant from the living and more desperate to reunite with her dead lover. She even suggests that they still run off to America, sticking to his original plan. He will be a dead spirit, but she will remain with him, and while people will find her crazy, she would be content just to spend her life with him. Peter tells her that he cannot leave Bly. When he tries to leave the borders of the property, he finds himself right back where he started. With this news, Rebecca is distraught, and as Peter tries to calm her down, her emotional outbursts and his touch allows Peter to inhabit Rebecca's body, something very similar to what happened to Miles the night he died. This hatches a new idea, prompting Peter and Rebecca to work on a new escape plan. He will possess her body again, and this time he will try to leave Bly while he is in control of her. But as Peter and Rebecca make it to the border of Bly, Peter is expelled from her body and remains trapped. Dejected, the couple tries to come up with more ideas, but unbeknownst to Rebecca, Peter already has ideas of his own, all at great cost to his lover. After disappearing for some time, Peter returns again to Rebecca. He claims that he has been exploring and learning new things about his new predicament. He tells her that he believes he's found a way for them to be together again, explaining to her that they can share her body, but unlike before, it will be permanent. Rebecca is initially cautious and scared, but once again, Peter is able to coax her into the idea. Rebecca makes Peter promise that they will be together again and that he will take care of her, and that they would share a life as partners. Peter promises her, and Rebecca and Peter recite the famous words, quote, "It's you, it's me, it's us." With the words uttered, Peter is able to possess Rebecca permanently, and the two now cohabitate her body. But what Peter did not tell Rebecca was that while they are reunited, it definitely isn't in the way that Rebecca had thought. Like driving a vehicle, only one person can be in the driver's seat, so only one person can take control of the body, while the other one is tucked away in a passenger seat. Usually, this means that they're placed in a dreamlike state, traveling through old memories. Rebecca is brought to a memory of her and Peter, sharing an intimate moment in the forbidden wing of Bly. She is once again wearing the coat that Peter claimed was a gift, and Rebecca soon becomes aware that something is wrong. But in her dreamlike state, she is once again coaxed into another memory of the two of them in bed. Peter, in control of Rebecca's body, walks to the cold lake, intending to drown her. He's remorseful for what he has to do, but he carries out her murder anyways, forcing her to wade into the cold lake. As her body begins to drown, Peter abandons Rebecca, and she is once again in full control of herself, only to find that it is too late. Rebecca painfully dies alone, now just as dead as Peter. When Rebecca realizes what happened to her, it is too late. She mourns for herself and finds herself trapped at Bly, sharing Peter's doomed fate. When she confronts him, Peter tells her that there is a way for both of them to escape. It is clear that this is Peter's real plan all along. Killing Rebecca will just force her to obey and go along with his diabolical plan. In his head, he rationalizes it as a way for the two of them to be together again. But this is just a selfish excuse for his deplorable actions. Not only did he murder Rebecca, he will now force her into his schemes, which gets even more sinister. His grand scheme is to use the Wingrave children as permanent hosts. He will coax Miles into giving up control of his body for Peter, and Rebecca will do the same for Flora. When they have full control of the children's bodies, Peter theorizes that they will be able to leave Bly and start a new life as Wingraves. To tempt the children, Peter and Rebecca begin to tuck the children away for small amounts of time. The children are able to relive old happy memories with their deceased parents. Once the children become hooked and crave more time reliving these memories, Peter and Rebecca begin to take their bodies over for longer periods of time. While Rebecca is definitely more hesitant to take over Flora's body, Peter is far more inclined and begins to take over Miles's body whenever he feels like. Over the course of the show, Miles will begin to act inappropriately towards the female staff at Bly, especially the new American au pair, Dani Clayton. This is of course due to Peter's influence and control. I went into detail about Miles' strange behavior in his own video, so again, please go check that out in the playlist. Now back to Peter. Now Peter relishes terrorizing the women at Bly, seemingly just because he enjoys their reactions and fears, revealing his sadistic side. He is however caught in the act once again by Hannah, who catches Peter as he tries to take over Miles's body. Enraged, Peter, who already hates Hannah, unleashes his anger onto her, using Miles as his conduit. He takes control of Miles and pushes Hannah into the well, killing his second victim. This again shows Peter's more vile and cruel side. He has no qualms about killing others if it suits his needs. Interestingly, he only begins to commit murder after his death, making him the second most dangerous specter at Bly, second only to the Lady in the Lake, Viola. Peter Quint is the secondary antagonist of the show. He has proven himself to be a selfish and cruel man time and time again, but things could have been different for Peter had he not suffered such a terrible childhood. It is revealed near the end of the show, when Peter is involuntarily taken back into his memories again, that Peter was abused by his parents when he was very young. Unlike the other characters in the show, Peter seems to be forced back into one painful memory instead of more pleasant ones like Rebecca, Hannah, or the Wingraves. He constantly relives the last time he saw his mother, who was blackmailing him into giving her money. The animosity between Peter and his father is elaborated on in this memory. This time, the memory plays out a little differently, and Peter confronts his mother, and it is revealed that his father physically and sexually abused him. His mother was complicit to the abuse, as she was fully aware of what was going on, but she chose to stay with Peter's abusive father. She also helped gaslight the young Peter into believing that the abuse was normal, and that he was being silly and unreasonable. This time, Peter laments as the hell he is in, forced to relive his worst memory over and over again. Quote, "At first I thought, this isn't so bad. I mean, it could have been worse. I mean, I could have been back there at home with Dad. I could have been tucked away in one of those nights. But then I started to realize why this was way worse than that. Why this was hell. Because I was a kid back then. I didn't understand what was happening to me. I didn't know what it meant. And you were there. You were the one to tell me it was okay, that what he was doing was okay. You said I was being silly. That's what you said. But I was innocent, wasn't I? I didn't know any better. But here, this time, well, I know better, don't I? This time, Seeing you in that fucking doorway, I've thought about every other kid that has ever spent the night, and how you knew what you knew and you didn't stop him. Why didn't you stop him? You killed me, Mom. You killed me, asking me to do this. I did what you wanted, and it killed me. I hope you know that, late at night, that you killed your son. It is clear that Peter feels more betrayed by his mother's actions, explaining his rage and resentment towards women. He also covets the Wingraves, and his plan for taking over the young Miles may have deep-rooted desires to relive his childhood again and have it play out differently. It is unfortunate that Peter never got the help he needed as a child, and like so many other children that were abused, grew up to become an abuser himself. The gaslighting, bursts of anger, jealousy, and propensity towards violence can all be direct results of his abuse. While it is not an excuse for his deplorable actions, it is an explanation as to why Peter turned out so broken and bitter. Sadly, with Rebecca's love, things might have turned out differently for him. But once Peter was killed by Viola, he chooses to murder Rebecca as a means to keep her by his side forever. When Dani Clayton interrupts Peter and Rebecca's plan, Peter decides to execute the plan ahead of schedule. He convinces Miles to relinquish control in a heartfelt but of course manipulative plea. Now, while it is completely sinister, I truly do feel that Peter believes what he is telling Miles. Quote, "Nothing sad will ever touch you, ever again. You just get your mom and your dad and a safe place with two people who love you so much, that makes you the luckiest man in the world, the richest. I wish I could be that rich." Here, Peter confesses what he truly wants in life: someone to love him and a safe place to call home. This is something that Peter was denied his whole life, and ultimately what drove him to his heinous crimes. Miles agrees to help Peter and seemingly gives up full control to him. Peter happily takes full control of the young boy's body. But before he can truly relish the moment, he's once again distracted by Hannah, who calls out for the children. Peter, in Miles's body, goes to dispatch Hannah's spirit once again. He lets Rebecca, who he assumes is now in Flora's body, watch over the bound Dani. Unbeknownst to Peter, though, Rebecca has had a change of heart and has freed Flora and Dani. Peter's plans are ultimately fouled by the two au pairs, Rebecca Jessel and Dani Clayton, who chooses to act altruistically towards Flora, a complete juxtaposition to how Peter manipulates and uses Miles. When Dani invites the lady in the lake into herself as a passenger, the curse over Bly is finally broken, freeing all the trapped souls, including Peter. Peter's final words are of sorrow and remorse as he apologizes to Miles, saying, quote, "I'm so sorry, Miles. I'm sorry." Peter then disappears into the beyond, never to be heard or seen from again. Peter's story is a complicated one. He is both victim and villain. There are many moments on the show that glimpses of a kinder and more tender Peter Quint shines through. Private moments with Rebecca shows how sensitive and hopeful he can be. There are also moments where Peter shows the Wingrave children affection and kindness, hints at his softer, more brotherly side. However, these moments are overshadowed by his horrible actions and selfish tendencies. Peter Quint, in many ways, is a very human villain, while Viola has a more supernatural and inexorable presence on the show, Peter acts more as a grounded villain. His motivations, while selfish and deplorable, are understandable. Peter feels wronged in his life, especially about his childhood, his class in an elitist society, and ultimately his untimely death. He feels inadequate, and when he feels threatened, he lashes out at others, leading him to commit horrible crimes against Hannah and Rebecca. Whenever he feels like he might lose Rebecca, Peter resorts to the worst aspects of his personality, using manipulative tactics against Rebecca. He also sexually harasses Jaime and Dani while possessing Miles, something he relishes because he's able to exert control over them. This is probably due to his sexual abuse that he faced as a child, where his father took away his control and autonomy over his own body. By harassing and harming others, Peter feels more in control. Peter seems to hate when women exert their own agency or power over him. This is seen with the rage he unleashes against Hannah Gross. Out of all the horrible actions, the one thing that Peter seems most remorseful for is what he did to Miles Wingrave. As mentioned before, Peter's last action at Bly is to apologize to Miles for everything that he did to him. I think this is because he truly did like Miles and saw a lot of himself in the young boy. Peter even gives Miles his father's keepsake. Now, while Peter hated his father, he did seem to have an attachment to the lighter, something he tells Miles was the best part of his father. So he kept the lighter as a small portion of all the good in his father, all the good things at least he wanted to keep of his father. And yet he handed it to Miles and let Miles keep it to cheer the boy up. Also, his heartfelt plea to Miles really did seem genuine. He was truly jealous of Miles for having two loving parents and a safe home to grow up in, something that he coveted very much. Sadly, Peter's life was destroyed by his parents, and in his own words, his mother's betrayal was something that killed him. Peter on the surface seems to be chasing wealth and fortune, but he's truly chasing after happiness. He perceives Miles Wingrave as the richest person, but not for his family's fortune, but due to how much Miles is loved. In contrast, Peter exists in a world alone and impoverished, doomed to obscurity and eternal poverty.
Thank you for watching the video. If you liked it, please click the like button and subscribe, and leave a comment. Thanks again.